What's up, biology students? Mr. Holloway here. Today we're going to be talking about water, specifically water molecules, and what makes these molecules so remarkable. Water is arguably one of the most important molecules on Earth. Without it, there would be no life as we know it. Earth is covered in water. That's why we call it the blue planet when seen from outer space. Water exists in all three phases here on Earth, as a solid, a liquid, and as a gas. So when we find frozen water on other planets, like Mars and Mercury, and liquid water on moons like Europa, we get really excited because water is a key ingredient for life. Here on Earth, life began in the water, and every cell of every living organism on the planet is filled with water. And it is in that most of the chemistry of life takes place. It is a pretty remarkable substance in a lot of ways. I mean, consider the fact that ice floats on liquid water. For most other substances, the solid form is more dense than the liquid form, but not so for water. Solid water floats in liquid water because solid water is actually less dense than liquid water. This is why deep lakes don't freeze solid in the winter, because water that cools enough to freeze floats to the top of the lake and forms an icy skin over the liquid water below. This also helps to insulate the water below, meaning that in a deep lake, there will always be at least some liquid water to support life throughout the winter. A water molecule is composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Covalent bonds hold these atoms together, meaning that each hydrogen is sharing an electron with the oxygen atom, and the oxygen atom is sharing an electron with each of the hydrogen atoms. Because of its shape, and because the shared electrons are often pulled closer to the large oxygen atom than they are to the smaller hydrogen atoms, one end of a water molecule has a slightly negative charge, and the other end has a slightly positive charge. So, just like a magnet has a north pole and a south pole, or a battery has a positive pole and a negative pole, water molecules also have poles. And we call these kinds of molecules polar molecules. The fact that water is a polar molecule is a huge part of what makes water such a remarkable substance. As a polar molecule, water is able to form hydrogen bonds with other polar molecules. It is able to do this because opposite electrical charges attract one another, kind of like the opposite poles of a magnet attract one another. In this picture, we can see a water molecule forming hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. Every water molecule can form hydrogen bonds with up to 4 additional water molecules, which in turn can form hydrogen bonds with other molecules. Essentially, this means that water molecules are sticky. They stick to each other and to a lot of other things as well. This means that water is cohesive. Cohesion is when molecules of the same kind stick to one another. Because water molecules stick to one another, water is able to form self-contained droplets that hold themselves together. And cohesion is why the droplet on the top of our penny here doesn't spill over the sides. This is also why water has surface tension. The spider in this picture is able to stand on the surface of the water because the hydrogen bonds holding these water molecules together are just strong enough to support its weight without pulling apart. Water is also adhesive, means that it also sticks to other things. We can see examples of this every time we fill up a glass of water, because water will stick to the sides of the glass in droplets. Cohesion holds the droplets themselves together, and adhesion holds the droplets to the side of the glass. If we look closely at the surface of the water in our glass, or in the case of this picture, our graduated cylinder, we can see that the surface isn't flat. Water forms a meniscus like this because of adhesion, and the water molecules sort of pile up on top of one another around the edges because they stick to the glass so easily. We can say the same thing on the outside of a straw inserted into that glass of water. Most importantly for living organisms, the combination of cohesion and adhesion makes water capable of something called capillary action, which we can see here in this photo. Water molecules stick to the fibers of our paper towel, as well as to other molecules of water. And these water molecules are able to move uphill against the force of gravity, absorbing upwards through the fibers of the paper towel and dragging other water molecules up behind them. Not only is this useful for being able to clean up spills, but this is also how water is able to get up into the leaves at the top of trees. Water absorbed by the roots of this tree sticks to the inside of hollow channels inside the tissue of the plant, and these water molecules are able to climb upwards from the roots to the leaves, keeping the leaves perky and able to conduct photosynthesis. This water eventually exits the leaves through transpiration, and just like a straw, when you pull liquid out through the top, more liquid is pulled up from the bottom. As you add heat energy to a substance, the atoms or molecules of that substance move faster and faster, and we perceive this as an increase in temperature. But because water molecules stick together, it takes a lot of energy to get them to move around any faster than they already are, which means that it takes a lot more energy to raise the temperature of water than it does to raise the temperature of, for example, sand. We would say that this means water has a higher heat capacity, or a higher specific heat, than sand does. On a beach in the middle of summer, the sand is going to be really hot, and the water is going to feel much cooler by comparison. At night, the sand cools down very rapidly and starts to feel cold, while the water feels, well, pretty much the same as it did during the day. But both the water and the sand were out in the same sunshine all day. Once again, it has to do with heat capacity. The water doesn't change temperature very much because it takes a lot of energy to raise the temperature of water. And there's a lot of water in the ocean to absorb all the sun's energy. The sand, however, has a much lower heat capacity, so it doesn't take as much energy to warm it up. As a result, the sand heats up quickly in the sun, and the water heats up a lot slower. By the same token, the sand also loses its energy and becomes cold a lot quicker, whereas the water kind of holds on to its temperature and remains warmer. This is a major benefit to living organisms, all of whom must maintain homeostasis in order to survive. Homeostasis is the ability of an organism to maintain a relatively stable internal environment, and failure to maintain homeostasis can mean sickness or even death. Hypothermia, or being too cold, and heat stroke, being too hot, are two examples. Our bodies start to act strangely and can become damaged if our internal temperature gets too far away from normal. But all our cells are filled with water, and it is difficult to change the temperature of water, so that helps us to maintain homeostasis. Same for aquatic and marine organisms, whose internal temperatures are greatly influenced by the temperature of the water around them. Because water changes temperature very slowly, organisms living in rivers, lakes, ponds, or oceans are able to maintain homeostasis because the water around them stays at a relatively constant temperature, and the more water there is, the more it will hold its temperature over time. The heat capacity of water also has a huge effect on climate. The Gulf Stream, for example, carries warm tropical water from the equator up to the western edge of Europe, releasing heat into the atmosphere as it goes. Water is also an amazing solvent, meaning that a lot of other substances can be dissolved in water. We can see in this picture how polar water molecules begin sticking to a crystal of salt placed in water. Because the salt is made up of ions, or charged atoms, the polar water molecules, which are themselves partially charged, stick to these ions and gradually pull the salt crystal apart, which is why salt seems to disappear when placed in water. It doesn't actually disappear. All the pieces are still there, but it does break apart into smaller and smaller pieces until eventually every ion in that crystal is separated and surrounded by a film of sticky water molecules. Many polar substances dissolve in water for this reason, while non-polar substances, like oils, do not. In this example, salt is the solute, water is the solvent, and we call the mixture or solution saline. But possibly the most important solution in our day-to-day lives is blood. Blood is actually both a solution and a suspension, since it contains dissolved material as well as material that does not dissolve, like blood cells. Roughly 45% of our blood is made up of cellular components that do not dissolve. The other 55% of our blood is composed of water with a bunch of stuff dissolved in it, and we call this solution plasma. You find all kinds of ingredients for life dissolved in blood plasma. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, proteins that help fight disease and induce clotting, nutrients like vitamins and glucose or blood sugar, hormones, cellular waste products, and dissolved gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. All of these important molecules and substances are transported in our blood to the cells in our body that need them. And it is the ability of water to act as a solvent that makes this possible. Some of the stuff that's dissolved in our blood also helps us to maintain homeostasis by preventing large changes in our blood pH. We call these things buffers because they buffer or protect us against sudden changes in our blood chemistry. For example, If you drink a glass of orange juice, which has a pH of around 3, it doesn't really cause the pH of your blood to change all that much because the hydrogen ions that make orange juice acidic react with buffers dissolved in our blood and are no longer able to change the pH of our blood. If we were to add that same orange juice to pure water, the resulting change in pH would be much greater. The fact that all of these buffers are able to dissolve in our blood is really beneficial, and is another important example of how the properties of water help to support life. In fact, as far as we know it, life would not be possible without water. Our bodies are mostly water, some parts more than others, and it is in this water that the chemistry of life takes place. Water is an amazing substance, so make sure you stay healthy by drinking a lot of it. And with that, I will bring our video to a close. Thanks again for watching, and remember that you can go back and watch this video as many times as you need to until you feel like you understand the concepts. See you next time!